In this video, we're going to talk about collecting data. In statistics, we collect data through several methods. The two main methods we're going to talk about in this class are going to be through observational studies and experiments. In an observational study, the researcher has no influence or they impose no control over the treatments that subjects get, meaning that we just watch the actual subjects and we observe what they're doing. In an experiment, a researcher has direct control and has an influence or imposes a treatment on a particular group. An experiment is also used to develop a direct cause and effect relationship between two variables. In statistics, the only way we can imply causation through two variables is to do an experiment. Here are the main differences between an experiment and an observational study. An observational study does not allow researchers to claim causation, only association. And that association is going to be called correlation. In observational study, we have these variables that are called confounding. And it's when the effects of two or more of the explanatory variables cannot be separated from each other. For instance, an example would be when you look at the sale of ice creams during the summertime and the number of shark attacks. Well, as one increases, as the number of sales of shark attacks increase, so does the number of ice cream sales. Does this mean that ice cream sales are causing more shark attacks? Well, if we try to correlate the two, they're highly correlated. But it would be silly to think that ice cream sales cause more shark attacks. There's a third variable that is playing with both those variables, and it's called a confounding variable. That variable would be the summer or the temperature. When do ice cream sales go up? During the summer. When are more people in the water and liable to get shark attacks? During the summer. Now, in an experiment, we get what's called a lurking variable. And a lurking variable is almost synonymous to a confounding variable, except in an experiment, we are able to control for that variable. Meaning we study it out in advance and we say that this variable plays with both variables, or if we have variable x and we want to know how it affects variable y, but we know that variable c affects both x and y, we can do a process what's called blocking on variable z, which helps remove the confounding element that involves an observational study. So we get these things called lurking variables, which are just like confounding variables, except confounding occurs in observational studies and they can't be removed. A lurking variable occurs in an experiment and they can be blocked or removed or manipulated so we don't see the effects as bad as we do in an observational study. The experiment also allows you to, because of this, allows you to develop a direct cause and effect relationship between the two variables that are under investigation. Now, an experiment involves a lot of terminology, so let's cover some of those terminologies. The first thing we're going to talk about is going to be the design of an experiment. And a good experiment has 4 principles that we should always follow. The first principle is called randomization. And randomization is the process of assigning subjects to treatment groups randomly. Random assignment helps us spread out the bias. For instance, let's say that a manager of an office wants to know if a new program, a new exercise program, is going to help his employees be happier and more productive in the process. So part of this experiment is going to randomly place some employees in the program which involves a yoga treatment. Well, if we let subjects pick their own treatments, where some subjects can do yoga and some subjects can do whatever the other control may be, you would expect those people that enjoy yoga to pick yoga as an actual treatment. Well, what are some stereotypes that may be associated with yoga to begin with? People that do yoga probably tend to be happier. They probably tend to be healthier. And in that process, they probably tend to be more productive to begin with. So the question now becomes, is it the yoga process that's actually having an effect? Or is it the people in the yoga process? So how do we fix that? Well, we fix it by randomly assigning people to those groups. If you put people in the group randomly, you can expect to get some people that do yoga on a normal basis and some people that don't. So what we're doing is spreading out our bias. The next principle of design is called control. Control is the process of removing confounding variables, and it's the part of an experimental design that makes it different from observation. In this particular process, we have a direct influence on the actual variables under investigation. When we control, we set up our baseline. So control is really the baseline, and it's going to allow us to see how effective is our new variable of study. The next element of experimental design is going to be what we call replication. Replication is the repetition of an experiment under the same or similar conditions. The reason that we replicate is we want to make sure that our design, our experiment, is not a fluke. We want to ensure that others can follow our procedures and get the exact same results under the exact same conditions. This is how we develop that cause and effect relationship. Replication is generally done by performing the experiment on more than one subject. The principles of design exist to help us deal with bias in the way we gather our data. Bias is the systematic tendency to favor one thing over another, and it's something that's automatically built into humans. Therefore, we use these processes of randomizing, which helps to spread out the bias, control, which helps to measure or reduce the bias, and replication, which helps to ensure that bias is sure to be kept out of our experiment. Now, the terminology for experiments go through these steps right here. The first thing you start off with an experiment is your experimental units. Your units are the items or the people that the test is actually being performed on, or who the experiment is being performed on. When you have humans experimental units, we call those subjects. And it's simply because you don't want to go around calling people to their face experimental unit number 1 or experimental unit number 2. So you say this is subject 1 or subject 2. It doesn't make them feel like hamsters. The next thing, the variable that is the variable that is being studied or that we have an interest in is called the response variable. And it's the variable that we're actually measuring. The response variable is the variable that is under investigation. The variable that can be manipulated is called the explanatory variable, also known as a factor. These are your independent variables, and they're the variables that, as you change this variable, what's happening to the response? So let's look at an example. It says, an article in a local newspaper reported that dogs kept as pets tend to be overweight. Veterinarians say that diet and exercise will help these chubby dogs get in shape. The veterinarians proposed 2 different diets, Diet A and Diet B, and 2 different exercise programs, Plan 1 and Plan 2. In Diet A, owners control the proportion of dog food and dog treats. In Diet B, a mixture of fresh vegetables with the dog food and substitute with regular dog treats with baby carrots. In Plan 1, there are 3 30-minute walks a week, and Plan 2 is 20-minute walks daily. We have 60 dog owners volunteer to take part in an experiment to help their chubby dogs lose weight. So the first question is this an experiment or is this an observational study? Well, are we imposing treatments to specific groups is the question you should ask. And as you can see, yes, we are putting dogs into 2 different groups. So this is definitely an experiment. And in this experiment, let's identify the subjects, the factors, and the response variable. So the subjects are, what are we actually performing the experiment? What are we actually performing the experiment on? And if you notice here, we have these dog owners who have dogs. So are the dog owners the actual experimental units or are the dogs? Well, do we perform the experiment on the dogs or do we perform the experiment on the owners? And the answer is we perform it on the dogs. So the actual subjects here are the 30 dogs. And we're going to set this up as a diagram to show you how this experiment works. So we have 30 dogs. available for us for this experiment. So you always start a diagram with your experimental units. The next thing we're going to do is this. We're going to look at what is the response variable. What variable am I actually interested in knowing something about? And here, we're interested in knowing about 60 dog, and this last sentence tells what we're interested in. 60 dog owners volunteer to take part in an experiment to help their chubby dogs lose weight. So we want to look at their weight loss. So the variable of interest that we're going to measure is going to be weight loss. And then the factor, there's two factors here. What variables can we manipulate to help lose weight? Well, we know we can manipulate variable diet. We have diet A and diet B, and we can manipulate variable plan, which is the exercise plan, plan 1 and plan 2. So our factors are diet and exercise. Now, the other elements of an experiment that we're going to talk about are what we call blinding and the treatment groups. The first thing I want to talk about is the treatments. The treatments are the active ingredients used to test the hypothesis. So in our case, our treatments are going to be what groups are we putting these dogs into? That's going to help us establish a treatment. And a possible treatment for any kind of experiment can be what we call a placebo. And a placebo is a treatment that has no active ingredients. We generally use placebos when we have human subjects because humans tend to influence their own results, such as if we did a weight loss experiment for a new drug. The question becomes, is the drug effective in losing weight, or are people doing something different to help themselves additionally lose weight? Well, if you join an experiment to lose weight, naturally you're probably going to do things differently. You may eat differently, you may change your lifestyle. Those things are naturally going to help you lose weight. So how do we help take that element out of our weight loss program and make sure that it's only the drug that's affecting the weight? Well, to do that, we use a placebo, which means that we're going to have a control group that gets no active ingredient. And when we look at that one group, the goal of the experiment is to make sure that even if we expect all groups to do something different, such as change their lifestyle, the group that got the drug should have more dramatic results than the group that had a placebo. These other elements are called blinding. Blinding is the technique where subjects do not know whether they have received a treatment or a placebo. So in certain experiments, we blind our subjects so they don't know what they're getting. This helps to ensure that bias is not a factor in our actual experiment. The other part of blinding is what we call double blinding. Double blinding is when the participants or the subjects and the researcher does not know who got what treatment. The importance of double blinding for researchers is, well, think about it like this. If a researcher works for a particular drug company and they want their drug to work, what are they going to do? Well, they may be biased in the way they select participants. For instance, in a weight loss experiment, they may give their drug to particular subjects that are heavier than others because they know that losing weight is easier for larger people when you change your lifestyle. Therefore, it'll make their drug look like it works a lot quicker than what it actually does. So we double blind in this case, and we let a third party come in and give the treatments out to groups. Therefore, this researcher nor the subjects know who gets what, and we actually have a valid experiment. So back to our dog experiment. So we have these 30 chubby dogs, and we know that the subject of the dogs, the response variable is the weight loss, and the factors of the diet and exercise. And so here's what we're going to do. We need to put these dogs into their groups. And these groups are going to be what we call our treatment groups. Well, our treatments come from our factors. Well, what are our factors again? Our factors are, you have diet, which consists of A and B, and you have plan or exercise, which consists of 1 and 2. So a dog can either go to diet A or diet B. If they go to A, they're going to get plan 1 or plan 2. If they go to B, they're going to get plan 1 or plan 2. So in our diagram, here's how we draw this. You can go to A1, A2, B1, or B2. And so we're going to put some dogs in this group, A1, dogs in A2, dogs in B1 and B2. Notice you can get the number of treatment groups you have, which in this case is 4 treatment groups, by multiplying the options, the number of options for the first factor, times the number of options for the second factor, in this case 2 by 2. And what we're going to do now is this. We want to compare the results after we put them in these groups. The dogs are going to go to the groups randomly. So we're going to randomize. We're going to randomly put these dogs into those treatment groups. And again, we're doing this to make sure we spread out our bias. Once we have our dogs in our treatment groups, the last step in this process is to actually compare our response variable. In this case, we want to compare the weight loss between the dogs. This right here is called a diagram. And you can see in your diagram, there's a couple things you should be able to see from this. The first thing you can see are the subjects. You can see your treatment groups, which are formed from your factors. And we know our factors here are diet and exercise. So the treatment groups come from there. And then you can see your response, which is to compare weight loss in the very end. This word random tells you how each dog got to a particular treatment group. Now, the last part of this is what can we blind, if this is a blind, double blind, or neither study, well, can we blind the dogs? The answer there is going to be no, because in order for the dogs to actually participate in the study, their owners have to know what they are getting. And so because the owners have to know, you can't blind the dogs.